When I stand before a blank canvas, before the texture, before the tools, before the first gesture, I no longer see an empty surface awaiting decoration. I see a silent world, a silent, breathing, dimensional portal capable of storing not just pigment, but capital, intention, and encoded cultural value. The kind that does not fade with fashion or get taxed by banks, the kind that lives in the folds between perception and meaning, and which quietly compounds across time without ever announcing its presence on a spreadsheet. Most people, when they see a painting, perceive only what the training permits: color, aesthetic, taste, design, maybe even emotion. But I was not trained in aesthetic obedience. I was trained by the silence behind the noise, by the pattern beneath the narrative. And in that silence, I discovered a secret. Not all paint is paint. Some paint is simply pigment, yes, an expressive release, a therapeutic gesture, a decorative surface. But some paint, when placed with precision, context, scarcity, and intention, becomes something else entirely. It becomes code. And that code, once embedded with a surface and made legible to the right eye, to the market, to the collector, to the system that trades perception for capital, transforms into a storage unit of value. That's why the ultra-wealthy do not just buy art. They acquire coded instruments of symbolic leverage, vehicles of value transmission that move between borders, between generations, and between currencies without friction. They don't need the painting to match their sofa. They need it to hedge against inflation, to signal membership in a network, to encode wealth into something portable, plausible, and above all, unquestioned. Because you do not negotiate over Rothko in a hallway. You do not argue over the price of an original basket during dinner. You nod, you accept. The value is established not just by paint, but by frame, context, scarcity, myth, and timing. And when all five align, the object becomes more than objects. It becomes infrastructure. This is what most people don't understand about art. They still think in linear returns, in interest rates, saving accounts, ETFs, and 101 chaos, while the elites think in narrative, comprehension, perceived authority, and symbolic asymmetry. They understand that art is not just investment, it is a shield, a flex, a weapon, a whisper, a key. So when I paint, I don't just create visual rhythm or emotion. I construct resonance, the kind of resonance that lingers not because of what it shows, but because of what it conceals. Because true value is rarely loud. It is encoded, it is whispered, it is left to be discovered. I don't paint because I'm an artist. I paint because I am an architect of meaning, and in a world saturated with noise, meaning is one of the last rare, tradable commodities that still has asymmetrical upside. So, what you are witnessing now, this canvas, this movement, this act, is not simply aesthetic, it's infrastructural, it's a transaction, it's a code drop, and in the right context, that's more powerful than gold. I don't just create artwork, I construct tangible capital. And I say that with full awareness of what those words mean, because in a world that's drowning in derivatives, in synthetic exposure, and invisible algorithms, and paper-backed illusions of value, I make something you can actually touch, hold, own, frame, pass on, anchor into space. Tangible capital is becoming rare. We have entered an age where everything is digitalized, tokenized, and depersonalized, where wealth lives on screens and vanishes in updates, where portfolios are managed by emotionless systems and identity is fragmented across platforms. But a painting, an original, physical, textural painting, resists that vaporization. It's slow, it's rooted, it occupies space with defiance, and in that defiance, it stores weight. This is not nostalgia, this is a strategic hedge against inflation, against delusion, against forgetting. Because, let's be honest, most people today are not actually building anything. They are optimizing, speculating, reacting. They are trading speed for depth, convenience for performance, and permanence. But art, real art, does the opposite. It holds, it stays, it compounds emotional and symbolic density over time, not because it tries to, but because it's built that way. That's why I create, not to express emotion, although emotion inevitably bleeds into it, but to materialize memory, to give form to frequency, to put weight into an otherwise weightless world. I don't want my value to depend on likes, followers, or artificial scarcity coded into a blockchain. I want it to rest in something heavier, something textured, something physical that contains within it a signal so precise, so intentionally placed, that even decades later, when the platforms are gone and the context has shifted, the object still holds charge. And that's what makes art dangerous. It bypasses language, it escapes algorithms, it builds a bridge between asset and meaning, capital and myth. And it does so quietly, not with spreadsheets, but with intuition. To those who understand finance, this makes perfect sense. Liquidity is power. Yes. But so is illiquidity when wielded intentionally. Because illiquid capital, the kind that is not easily moved or measured, is often the most defensible. It can't be frozen by platform. It can't be tracked by feed. It can't be deleted, demonetized, or deplatformed. It's there, in the room, and once it's there, it begins to speak. To some, it says investment, to others, signal, but to those who truly understand value, it says legacy. And I would rather build legacy than optimize for views. I would rather leave behind an object charged with presence than another file lost in a scroll. That's why I do this. That's why this canvas exists. It's not passive. It is a code-locked, asset-bearing, value-dense fragment of personal infrastructure. It's not just art. It is the materialization of a private currency, mine. You know, art can be a safe haven when assets lose their soul, when the world becomes too noisy, when markets scream, charts fluctuate, and analysts debate endlessly on screens. I seek silence. And in that silence, I see color. We live in a time where numbers chase numbers, price per square foot, annual return, volatility index, dividend yield. But what happens when numbers lose their meaning? When returns become digital ghosts, flickering digits on a screen, detached from human experience? I started asking myself, what if true wealth was not about multiplication, but resonance? Because here is the truth: money has become motionless. It flows between accounts, bounces off algorithms, sits idle in savings. But art, when it's real, moves. It moves people, it stirs emotions, it shifts timelines, it awakens memory. You can't say that about a stock portfolio. You don't cry in front of a hedge fund. But a painting can split you in half. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's what the financial system doesn't want you to remember. That's not all value is measurable. That some forms of wealth cannot be taxed, traded, or traced. Art, in its purest form, is untouchable. It resists classification. It rejects spreadsheets. And yet, it holds immense power, quiet power, the kind that does not shout from billboards but whispers through generations. Where do I begin? That's a question many ask when they first consider investing in art, and the answer is not look for what's trending, because trends are tropes. Instead, look for presence, look for vibration, look for works that hold a pulse, even when no one else is watching. I don't buy art because someone told me it might go up in price. I buy because something in it mirrors me or future me. A a version of me I have not met yet, a timeline I have not lived. Art, in that sense, becomes a mirror of possibility. And unlike algorithmic trades or real estate transaction, art feels. It breathes. It waits for you to arrive. Why does this matter now? Because as we step into a world where synthetic realities and AI-generated assets flood the market, the line between creation and simulation blurs. And soon, the only things left with true value will be the ones that carry intention. That is why I invest in art, not for status, not for speculation, but as an anchor, a reminder that I'm still a human, even when the world forgets. Let's talk about the illusion of art price and why it is manufactured. Let's take a moment to explore something that most people miss when they talk about art: the actual price, not the value, not the feeling, not the inspiration, the raw, numerical, market-assigned price. Why is it that one canvas sells for 500 euros while another, often on the same wall in the same gallery, is priced at 50,000? Is it the technique, the pigment, the years of experience behind the artist? Something, but often no. The truth is, art pricing is a spell, a constructed perception, a psychological and economic ritual that only works when enough people believe in it. And just like money, once you peek behind the veil, you realize it's not real in the way you thought. The price of a painting is not its worth. It is its story, its positioning, its packaging, and its place in a controlled narrative. This is why a banana topped to a wall can sell for 6 figures, because in the elite art world, value is not found, it is declared. And that's where things get interesting, because if art pricing is a narrative, then who writes that narrative? Who sets the tone? Who decides what is valuable and what is not? Spoiler, it is not the artists, and it's not you. It's the curators, the collectors, the agents, the gatekeepers, the PR firms, the whisper networks of galleries and moneyed insiders who elevate one piece while ignoring another. The same painting in Paris might be unnoticed, but placed in a Monte Carlo penthouse with the right lighting, the right person endorsing it, and a quiet rumor about who might be interesting, suddenly it's rare, exclusive, and worth every cent. It's not the canvas that changed, it's the stage, the scene, the optics. And this is how illusion becomes economy. But what if you learn to see it? What if you understand the mechanics of this illusion, and instead of being a victim of it, you start to work with it? This is the key. Because when you understand that value is perception and perception is constructed, you stop asking for permission. You stop waiting for someone to validate your work. You start building your own value structure. You start crafting your own myth, your own provenance, your own backstory that breathes value into what you create. This isn't deception, it's architecture. And in the world of modern wealth and modern art, architecture of perception is the foundation of value. If you can shape perception, you can shape the price. And let me go deeper. Think of the financial system. Think of how it operates. Derivatives, futures, options, abstract, speculative, layered products with no physical form. What gives them value? Consensus, agreement, the belief that others will accept and trade them. Art is the same. It is not outside the financial system. It is the perfect mirror of it. Art is not anti-capitalist. Art is capitalism in its most poetic, most psychological, most beautiful form. And that is why investing in art, your own or someone else, is not just an aesthetic decision. It is an act of participation in the illusion. It's saying, I understand this game and I choose to play. And when you play well, art becomes not only beauty, but also currency. What if the real asset was never the painting itself, but the aura it radiates? That's a question I kept returning to again and again as I watched people argue over the price of pigments, materials, formats, frames, signatures, as if the canvas was merely a sum of visible inputs. But the truth is, no serious collector buys what they see. They buy what they sense. They buy what they perceive others will perceive. Because in the high-end world of capital allocation through art, what truly holds value is not the color, it is the charge behind the color. Not the object, but the aura of the object emits when placed in a specific context with specific timing, surrounded by a curated myth. In this way, art behaves more like a psychological instrument than a physical one. And those who understand this, who build aura into form and form into narrative, are not just artists, they are asset architects. I learned this not from galleries, not from books, but from watching the world's elite interact with space. They don't buy furniture, they buy composition. They don't buy houses, they buy viewpoints, angles, prestige, scarcity, atmosphere. And when they buy art, they are not buying pigment on canvas, they are buying presence. Because presence is the one thing you cannot fake. You can fake statistics, projections, digital scarcity, or even authority, but you cannot fake the energetic gravity of a well-placed object that holds story, time, scarcity, and encoded authorship in one concentrated form. And that's what I try to build into every painting I make. Not just composition, but presence density. Something that can't be screenshotted or copied. Something that shifts the frequency of a room, not because it's loud, but because it's anchored. This is why I say art is infrastructure, but it is soft infrastructure, invisible capital, our baked equity. No one will say this in the language of finance, but I will. My canvas is a slow release alternative asset. Its liquidity is slow and low intentionally. Its yield is narrative based. Its value is not realized through resale but through placement. And when placed right, it doesn't just decorate wealth, it magnifies it. Art like this is not for everyone. It is not mass market. It is not algorithmic. It is not designed to scale. It is designed to resonate for years, sometimes decades, with a very specific kind of eye. That eye doesn't look for decoration. It looks for density. It looks for signal. It looks for legacy. And that is what I'm offering. Not an object, not a product, but a frequency-locked storage unit of symbolic capital embedded in form. That to me is real art. That to me is financial elegance. You know, the more I studied how capital moves, not just among individuals, but among families, generations, institutions, the more I realized that the wealthy rarely invest in isolation. They don't invest in stocks alone, or real estate alone, or art alone. They invest in ecosystems. And within these ecosystems, art holds a unique position, not just as luxury, not just as taste, but as a non-correlated asset class that preserves value when other markets fail. But what does it mean? It means that when equities crash and crypto bleeds and interest rates spike and real estate stagnates, strategically acquired artwork can continue to appreciate, or at the very least hold steady. It's not because a canvas is magic, it's because psychologically of ownership behind it is structurally different. Art does not respond to rate hikes or GDP data in real time. It responds to perception. It responds to narrative. It responds to contextual capital. The ability of the buyer to position the artwork within a wider portfolio of meaning. And this is what most people miss. They think of art as decoration, as indulgence, but in truth, art is storage, symbolic, resilient, asymmetric storage. In fact, if you talk to wealth managers or family offices, they will tell you that more and more ultra high net worth individuals are allocating a percentage of their portfolios, anywhere from 5% to 15%, to physical art assets, particularly pieces that come with narrative weight, provenance, cultural relevance, and scarcity. These assets are not flipped, they are held quietly, often off balance sheet, passed on through generations, because unlike stocks, which can be taxed and frozen, or crypto, which one can be traced and hacked, a physical artwork stored in a private vault or a trusted location becomes a kind of shadow capital, visible only to those it's meant for. That is why so many of my collectors are not looking for flashy colors or trends. They are looking for permanent presence, something that reads like an emotional hedge, something that not just feels like wealth, but even before the market confirms it, it's felt like wealth. And this is the key. True collectors don't chase liquidity. They build slow liquidity, assets that mature in context, that carry identity, that create visual gravity in a space. Because a painting, when placed properly, does not just sit on a wall. It anchors value. It tells visitors, this isn't just aesthetic, this is a capital intention. This wall is part of my portfolio. This texture is part of my statement. This brush stroke is part of my identity as an investor. And the irony, most people won't even see it, but the right ones will. And in a world oversaturated with information, hype, and content, those who can create low noise, high density value, the kind that does not need to be explained, will be the ones who preserve capital far beyond the current cycle. That is what I build when I paint. Not trends, not decoration, but a time-resistant storage unit for identity-aligned value, a non-correlated, illiquid, long-term appreciating emotional asset, held in form, signed with intent. There is a quiet crisis unfolding in modern finance, though few speak of it directly. It's not about interest rates or housing bubbles or global debt. Those are symptoms. The deeper crisis is the erosion of meaningful value in an age of infinite replication. When anything can be copied, sold, reposted, minted, or streamed at zero marginal cost, the question becomes, what still holds weight? What still carries presence? In such a world, scarcity isn't just a supply issue, it becomes a design choice. And that is why more and more investors, especially those operating above the visible market, are shifting attention toward private, non-digital, perception-based asset classes, not because they hate tech, but because they understand that real wealth does not scale, it anchors. Art, when created with intention and conceptual capital, functions as exactly that kind of anchor. It is not scalable, it is not viral, it does not trend, but it endures. It matures in silence, and it grows in value precisely because it exists outside the velocity of digital replication. That is why I often say, I'm not painting pictures. I am issuing slow-moving capital instruments designed to preserve value over decades, not quarters, to operate as non-taxable cultural walls embedded in a form aligned with identity and immune to the fatigue of faith-based attention economies. Because, let's be honest, most people are not buying stocks anymore. They are gambling, they are speculating, they are betting on signals they don't understand, in markets they do not control, using tools they did not design, and they call that strategy. But real strategy, legacy level wealth strategy, is not about chasing yield. It is about preserving signal. A family office does not ask how fast can this grow. It asks how well does this hold? And when the answer is it is beautiful, untraceable, illiquid, and tax agnostic, you have just described the perfect private asset. This is the real reason serious capital allocators buy art. Not for color, not for canvas, but for placement logic. Because a well-placed artwork inside the right estate or office is not just a piece of decor. It is a statement of intent. It says, I do not need this asset to move quickly. I need it to exist powerfully. And sometimes that existence alone protects more capital than any liquid trade ever could. People talk about hedging against inflation, but what about hedging against cultural decay? What about hedging against emotional volatility, against algorithmic exposure, against the delusion of personal identity? That is the hedge I am building. When I create, I'm not just building for beauty. I am building for wealth, insulation, for emotional sovereignty, narrative leverage, and symbolic permanence. Because in the end, the highest return assets won't be the fastest moving, they will be the best placed. And that is what I'm placing stroke by stroke. let's talk about another thing. Not all returns are financial. Some are emotional. Some are symbolic. Some are strategic, but invisible to spreadsheet. This is something I had to unlearn before I understood art as capital, because traditional finance teaches you to choose quantifiable results. Return on investment, annualized performance, portfolio beta. You learn to measure value through volatility, liquidity, yield, and risk exposure. But nowhere in that language do they teach you to quantify presence, to account for emotional signal, to price in symbolic weight. But in the real world, the world of high trust relationships, closed door capital movement, legacy planning, and reputation based access, emotional yield is real, and it is often the most valuable layer of return. Because capital does not always move through wires. Sometimes it moves through rooms, through conversations, through context, through trust. And when a painting becomes a signal in that space, when it silently aligns you with a deeper archetype of taste, identity, or timelessness, it returns value in a form for more durable than numbers. This is what I call asymmetric return through hour. The painting doesn't need to be sold to generate value. Its mere presence, its placement in the right environment, at the right time, with the right narrative, can open doors, shift perception, and anchor status. This is soft capital strategy, and those who understand it build their portfolios not just with liquidity but with emotional architecture. And yes, I understand the pushback. People say, that's not real value, that's subjective, that's manipulation. But every market is subjective, every valuation is social. Why is a tech stock worth 80x earnings? Why is beachfront property valued higher than inland land with better fundamentals? Narrative, framing, contextual demand. The same logic applies here. In fact, art is often a leading indicator of future capital flows because it responds to cultural undercurrents faster than institutional asset classes can. This is why serious investors now include art in their allocation models. They don't just see it as decoration. They see it as a strategic hedge against volatility, not just economic but emotional. Because when the world destabilizes, people don't just look for liquidity, they look for identity anchors. They look for signals of permanence. And that's what a good painting is, not a commodity, not a transaction, but an identity anchor embedded in form, placed with it intent, charged with asymmetric symbolic density. So when I paint, I think like a portfolio manager, not in numbers, but in energy, in yield, in timing, in placement, in the ability of one asset placed precisely to shift the gravity of an entire place. That's what asymmetric return looks like, and that's what I build. Wealth that does not outlive you is consumption. That's the rule I started operating from the moment I understood the difference between income and capital. Income is temporary, a reward for labor, often taxed, often spent, often gone. Capital, on the other hand, is memory made structural. It's the architecture of permanence. And those who understand the long game of capital know this. It's not how fast your new worth grows that defines your legacy. It is how well it holds shape after you are gone. That is why I paint. Not for attention, not for applause, but for inheritance. Not necessarily for my own family, but for whoever needs to hold something that resists forgetting. You see, true wealth is not loud, it is well placed. It lives in silence, it moves through contracts, vaults, and private collections, and sometimes it's hanging quietly on a wall, silently appreciating in symbolic yield while the market spins in chaos. This is what people miss when they ask, how much can this painting sell for? That's the wrong question. The real question is, what does owning this painting signal over 30 years? Because in capital strategy, signal is everything. It determines trust, access, deal flow, network tier. And the painting, if placed right, becomes part of that signal system. Wealthy families know this. That is why they don't only buy shares of properties, they buy identity, they buy reputation architecture. And art plays a critical role in that structure, precisely because it does not expire like trends, it compounds meaning over time. A painting created with intent during the right era, from the right context, by the right voice, carries weight in rooms where money is secondary to memory. This is why many high-end net worth individuals don't even display certain works publicly. They store them, protect them, encode them with future value. Because some assets appreciate best in silence, like trust. And that's what real art is, a trust-bearing asset. It's not about today's price, it's about tomorrow's gravity. So when I create, I think in terms of decades. Where will this live? Who will own it? What will it say about them and about me in 2045? Because that is the kind of timeline capital understands. The biggest financial mistake most creators make is that they treat their work like a product, like something that has to move quickly, sell quickly, prove itself fast. But real capital does not move fast. It moves deeply. It anchors and it waits. And when the time is right, it speaks louder than any trend ever could. This is how I design my work, as a legacy object, optimized not for virality but for visibility in the eyes of those who recognize symbolic concentration as a form of power, because sometimes the loudest signal in the room is the one no one talks about, and that's where true capital lives. Some of the most valuable assets in the world are the ones you will never see. Not because they are locked away in vaults, although many are. Not because they are inaccessible, although they often are. But because the true elite, the ones who have mastered wealth not just as accumulation, but as architecture, know that the highest value capital is often the least visible. We live in a world obsessed with exposure, with numbers, rankings, valuations, market caps. But those who operate at the top know that discretion is a form of dominance, and that non-visibility is not a weakness, it is a shield. This is where art begins to operate differently, not as a performance, not as decoration, but as strategic capacity, a way to hold value in a form that does not scream capital, but still stores it with full density. A painting, especially one created intentionally, framed precisely, and placed selectively, can become a non-verbal security layer. It speaks only to those it's meant for, to others its texture, but to the initiated its code. You don't see family offices posting spreadsheets of the art they hold. You don't see elite investors bragging about what hangs in their private dining rooms, because some assets are not about display. They are about containment, about signal restriction, about controlling who sees what and when. This is called the discretion premium, and it's real. An artwork that's never been posted online, never been offered at auction, never been diluted by reproduction, increases in myth. It becomes capital without exposure, and in today's hyper-tracked environment, that's rare. This is why I don't mass produce. This is why I don't release everything I make, because I don't just create paintings, I create access points, and not everyone should have access. In finance, there is something called access control, the idea that not all capital should be open to all participants, that the architecture of scarcity depends on exclusion. In art, the same applies. True value compounds when it's not constantly revalidated. And so, I have chosen to make certain pieces unrepeatable, unsearchable, undocumented, except by the person who holds them. They are not content. They are not product. They are quite capital vehicles designed for those who understand that sometimes the less people know about what you own, the more power it holds. So when I paint, I don't just think in terms of exposure, I think in terms of containment, in terms of shielding value from noise, from platforms, from algorithmic inflation. Because in a world where everything screams, the asset that whispers or does nothing at all becomes the one that lasts. And that is the kind of asset I choose to build. There is a specific category of asset that does not need to be sold to create value, because its very placement, its presence, its silent alignment with identity produces a form of long-term yield that transcends resale, outperforming even the most liquid instruments in one critical dimension: permanence. These assets, narrative-driven, perception-shaped, context-sensitive, are rarely tracked by institutions because they are not designed to be tracked. They are not traded in open markets, not measured in PE ratios, not reflected in dashboards, and yet they quietly shape access, elevate positioning, and influence trust, all of which translate invisibly but unmistakably into capital outcomes. When I speak of art as asset, I'm not talking about canvas plus point. I'm referring to the synthesis of story, scarcity, intention, and timing embedded into a physical form designed to hold shape across multiple environments, across cycles, across regimes. A painting, when crafted as a capital object, behaves like a signal lock. It does not move, but it affects everything around it. Its power is not in liquidity, it is in gravity. People often ask, what is the return on investment of a painting that is never sold? And to that I answer, what is the return on investment of the table you negotiate at? Of the architecture you walk clients through? Or the watch you wear when closing a seven-figure deal? Not all returns are transacted. Some are transferred through perceived alignment. This is why top-tier investors allocate capital not just into things they can exit, but into assets that anchor their environment. It's not just about what you hold, it's about what holds you. In portfolio theory, you are taught to diversify across asset classes to reduce risk, to balance growth stocks against bonds, to hedge volatile assets with stability. But the ultra wealthy take this further. They don't just diversify by class, they diversify by perception layer, by visibility exposure, by emotional texture. They understand that a portfolio is not just numbers on a chart, it is a map of symbolic alignment. It tells a story, and like all good stories, the silences matters as much as the plot. Art, when understood through this lens, becomes the quiet hedge, the yield that doesn't announce itself but accumulates through placement, context, and time. You don't flip it, you don't explain it, you live beside it, and in doing so, you become something else in the eyes of those who notice. This is the essence of strategic identity. Placement using form not to impress but to calibrate signal within a chosen frequency band of perception. That is what my paintings are designed for, not mass, not speed, but presence calibration at the capital level. They don't need to be everywhere, they need to be exactly where they belong. And when they are, they don't just sit, they shape the room. And sometimes that is the most powerful kind of return on investment there is.